All right, so in the end of the recipes video, I touched on EP and AP, and essentially how we need to convert between the as purchased and the edible portion. So the example I used was an onion. So if I have an onion, I buy this onion from the grocery store. It could be 12 ounces or whatever, but I'm not going to, in my recipe, I'm probably not going to use the entire onion. I'm going to have to cut the top and the root off of it. I'm going to have to peel the skin off of it. And so I'm going to lose a little bit of the onion just because, that's part of life with vegetables. We have to remove part of it to where we get down to the edible portion. Same way if I buy a cantaloupe, I'm not going to be able to eat the whole cantaloupe or the whole watermelon. Although some people do, but I'm going to have to cut the rind off of it, and then the inside part, the melon part, that's the edible portion. But I'm going to lose some of the weight, and so we have to be able to calculate for that. Otherwise, our order quantities from our vendors might not get us enough product to be able to cover all of the dishes that we need to make. And then again, if we're not incorporating that loss into our recipes and our requisitions, then we might not have the correct cost of ingredients for each of the items. So I touched on it in the last video, but AP is the as purchased. So if I buy an onion, it's going to come whole. If I buy green peppers, they're going to come whole, and I'm going to have to process them to get them into whatever form that we want to use them to cook with. So AP is as purchased. EP is edible portion. So that means the part that we're actually going to be able to eat. Yield percentage is the amount of product that we have after we've processed it. So AP, let's say that AP is 10 ounces. Once we take the, we'll say, tomato or whatever. So our tomato weighs 10 ounces. Once we've cut the core out of it, now we have 8 ounces. And so we have 10 ounces AP, so as purchased, this tomato was 10 ounces. We took the core out of it, and that core weighed 2 ounces, and so we have 8 ounces of edible tomato left over. So our EP is 8 ounces. Well, the yield percentage is how much of the product that we actually get to use. So we get to use 8 of the 10 ounces, so we have a yield percentage of 80%. And I'm going to kind of go through that as we go through these next few slides. There's a couple of things. A butcher's test, and I don't really care so much about knowing this, but a butcher's test, there's going to be some shrinkage during the trimming process. So if a butcher is chopping up a cow carcass, they're going to lose some fat and some bones and stuff. Not so concerned about you using that, but essentially what we're going to use to calculate a bunch of these things through the next couple of weeks is our book of yields. I didn't make you buy one for this. If you're going to take $49.85, you're going to need to get yourself a book of yields because we're not going to give you all of these things. You're going to have to actually look them up. But the book of yields, and I probably should have got mine out for you. It's a book where they've gone through, the authors have gone through, and they have tested on all of these different products. Every vegetable you can think of, every fish, every meat, everything. Like they have gone through and they've determined how much of it is waste. And they've also determined how much, if we take an onion and we dice it up and we measure out in a cup of diced onions, they figured out how much that cup of diced onions weighs. And so we don't necessarily have to test it for ourselves. We're going to go to this book of yields, and it's going to give us that answer. All right, so to figure out our edible portion, and don't let this basic algebra, don't let it scare you. It's easy multiplication. But to figure out the edible portion, we take the purchased amount times the yield percentage. So if let's say I'm doing my tomato, we say that we bought my tomato and it was 10 ounces. So I'd put 10 ounces here. I go into my book of yields and I find tomatoes, and it says the yield percentage of tomatoes is 80%. I would take my 10 ounces times 80% or 0.8, and that's going to give me an EP of 8. So just like we did earlier. So 10 times 80% equals 8. Like I said, for now, I just want you to kind of take it in, get the get the essence of what we're doing, try to understand the concepts behind it, and then later in the week when I actually take you through the applications, it'll make perfect sense, I guarantee. And if for some reason it doesn't, you can call me out on it, and I'll walk through it with you again. But I'm going to go through the concepts of it right now, and then later in the week when we actually go through applications, it'll all make sense as to why we're doing this. We can do the reverse. So if the edible portion is given in the recipe, so if our recipe, I guess one way to look at it is if our recipe said a julienne onions. So if it's julienne onions, then that tells us it's an EP, because to julienne an onion, we have to take the skin off of it, and we cut the roots off, and then we julienne only the good part. So that's going to tell us it's EP. And I'll definitely make sure that in your recipes it's very clear as to whether it's an EP or an AP quantity. Most of the time in your recipes it's going to be EP. So if it tells you, if you're making a casserole and it tells you need 5 pounds of boneless pork diced, well, that's going to tell you that if you already have the pork already diced up and there's no bones and there's no fat or anything like that extra stuff in there, that's going to tell you it's EP. So to get, let's go ahead and use that example. So we had 5 pounds of boneless, let's say boneless, skinless pork. That's kind of gross. Boneless pork, 1-inch cubes or whatever, and we have 5 pounds. So we're going to go ahead and say, okay, well, that's an EP quantity. So we know that we need 5 pounds EP. Well, so we go to our book of yields, we find the yield percentage, and we'll say the yield percentage is 50%, just to make it really easy. So 50% yield, so we'd take 5 pounds divided by 50%, or 0.5, and that would tell us that we actually need to order 10 pounds. So we're going to have 5 pounds of usable and then 5 pounds of waste. So we would have 10 pounds total, 5 pounds usable, 5 pounds waste, because half of it is going to actually be waste. Okay, so here's a little example. Our recipe calls for 6 pounds of diced carrots. So we're looking at our recipe. It says 6 pounds diced carrots, or carrots, comma, diced. Well, I'm going to look at that and I'm going to go, okay, well, it's got diced carrots, so that means it's going to have to be an EP. So we've already peeled the carrots and we've cut the root off of it, and probably cut the gross little top piece off of the carrot, and then we've gone through and we've diced it up. So that means it's an EP. So if I'm trying to figure out how much I need to order, well, I need to make sure that I order the AP amount. So to find AP, I take EP divided by the yield percentage. So I go back to my recipe, and the EP is 6 pounds. So I put my 6 pounds in here. I go to my book of yields, and for all the book of yield stuff that you'll need for this class, I'm just going to give it to you. I'm not going to make you look it up. I will tell you what the yield percentage is. I'll tell you what the ounces per cup or whatever is that you need. So I go to my book of yields. I find the yield percentage is 81.3%. So then I just plug it into this equation. So the AP is going to be 6 pounds divided by 81.3%. To get your percents into a number, you move your decimal point over 2 places. So 6 pounds divided by 0.813. That's going to give me, I need to order 7.38 pounds. You can leave it as that quantity, or you can go ahead and take it over to 7 pounds, 6 ounces. It's completely up to you. So I started out, I looked at my recipe. It said I needed 6 pounds of diced carrots. So in my mind, I looked at that and I said, okay, diced carrots. Well, if the carrots are already diced, that means they've cut the top and the root off, and they've peeled it, and so it's going to be an EP quantity. So if I'm trying to figure out how much to order, I need to find the AP, because AP equals amount needed, amount to purchase, and so then I just plug it into my equation. AP is EP divided by the yield percentage. If you look at this, your EP is always going to be less than AP, unless for some reason the yield is 100%, well then you wouldn't need to change it anyway. But your EP is always less, because you're going to lose some product. So AP is always bigger. If you do a calculation and it comes out the other way, that AP is smaller than EP, you've done something wrong. You've done it backwards. So AP is always bigger, because AP, you have the whole thing. EP, you've cut the top and the root off, and you've peeled it. Convert weights to measure. So this is where we were looking at our Philly cheesesteak recipe, and we had the peppers and onions. So our recipe gave it to us in cups, but we need to figure out the actual weights. And so how we do that is we take the number of cups that our recipe gives us, and we multiply that by the number of ounces that are in each cup that our Book of Yields is going to tell us, and that's going to give us an EP quantity. So that's only EP, so if we need to figure out how much to purchase, we're going to have to take it one step further. But we'll start out doing a little example of this. So we go to our recipe. It calls for 3 cups of diced celery. Well, it's a diced celery, so that right there is going to go ahead and tell me it's an EP quantity, and we need 3 cups of it. So we need 3 cups of diced celery. So I'm going to try to first off, we just want to turn this into a weight. So we want to take our 3 cups and we want to get a weight just to make our recipe a little bit more accurate. So I go to the Book of Yields and I see that celery weighs 4 ounces per cup. And this is how it reads in the Book of Yields: trimmed, cleaned ounces, weight per cup. So basically it tells us that this is an EP quantity. It's been trimmed and it's been cleaned. So the celery, we've cut the root part off, we've cut the top of the stalks off, we've cut the leaf parts off, and so now we're just left with celery stalks that we dice up. So it's been trimmed and cleaned. So EP, it tells us that our celery weighs 4 ounces per cup. Ounce weight per cup is 4. So our celery weighs 4 ounces per cup, and we need 3 cups of it. You can probably do that math in your head, but we want to find the EP weight. So EP is the ounces per cup times the number of cups. So it's 4 ounces per cup times 3 cups. I'll always give you these numbers. I'll always give you the Book of Yields numbers. You'll look at your recipe, you'll see you need that, and so you find out that you need 12 ounces. That's great if you're just converting your cups to the EP quantity. Now, to figure out how much we actually need to order, then we go back to what we did originally. So we're going to kind of walk through this example one more time, but our recipe calls for 3 cups of diced celery. We know that it weighs 4 ounces per cup, and then again our Book of Yields tells us it's 68.8% yield, so we need to find the AP amount. So to find the AP amount, first what we have to do is just what we did before. We find the EP, so we got to convert this to a weight, which we do by multiplying the 4 ounces per cup times 3 cups. So AP is EP divided by yield percentage. From the earlier calculation, which we did just a minute ago, we found out that based on this, our recipe needs 12 ounces of diced celery. We had 4 ounces per cup times the 3 cups, so we need 12 ounces of diced celery. The yield percentage is 68.8, and so we just plug it in. So the AP amount for our recipe, we have the 12 ounces, the 3 cups of diced celery at 4 ounces per cup gives us 12 ounces. We divide it by the yield percentage, so we're still in EP, so now we have to go back and account for the tops of the celery stalks and the root, and then even the little bit of the root that has a dirt part in it that we cut off, and maybe the dirt even weighed a little bit. So we got it all cleaned up. So 68.8%, we just divide those through, and it tells us that we need to make sure that we order 17.44 ounces, or 1 pound 2 ounces, to make sure that we have enough for our recipe. So that's the quick EP and AP overview with a couple of examples. As we get into the next section, we're going to be looking at our requisition form and our recipe costing forms, and we're going to talk about taking that Philly cheesesteak recipe, which I'll actually do a different example since that one's part of your assignment for next week. But we're going to look at taking a standardized recipe and requisitioning for the products that we need, and then costing out that recipe. So we'll get into that next week, and we'll do some real applications of the EP and AP quantity stuff.